Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back from lunch. Can I just quickly request my panel speakers to just be coming up, to be mic'd up in the meanwhile while we get started? I'm trying that we get started now since we have a next session starting at 3:30 and we will be chased out. So I'm going to request Dr. Ian, Dr. Motlalipule, please come up. I will introduce you guys when you get here, just so that you can be assisted to be mic'd up on the stage. Gabriel, Dr. Blessed. Thank you. Can we get assistance for the micing up?
I'm going to try and connect with Sandra.
Yeah, they are connected. Sandra,
she's already online.
Yeah, they're online. Sandra is with us.
From Colombia.
Yeah.
If she's online, why didn't you start with her?
All right, so we get started. This is the very last session of what I would like to call a highly anticipated track of this BioAfrica Convention 2022. And we really had great interactions in the last two sessions that happened on this track, the cannabis industrialization. They laid the great foundations on the regulatory frameworks as well as the best practices in cannabis. And I must say that quite enriching in going forward and also anchoring this very theme of this the fifth BioAfrica Convention. I also just want to say this very last session is one of the key factors of what will drive this cannabis industrialization into its thriving potential. We have a great panel that is going to be giving you more insight, and what we're going to be looking at is going down the value chain. We know, and we've been pointed out on those potential that this can go and what South Africa, as well as the rest of Africa, can be positioned on this particular industry that we can see is growing on high demand. And there is nothing out of what was said that can make you deny the importance of innovation in this industry, that when you have entrepreneurs that are using the high impact science as well as formulators making the cutting-edge formulations to ensure that the products from this particular cannabis plant that we are focusing on can thrive and lead to us ensuring that we capture each and everything out of this. So I have with me a great panel that are going to help unpack what are the strong research as well as the innovation for product development in this very industry. And we're going to go down in terms of value chains on the agricultural value chain on cultivations from our council, research council, agricultural research councils. And we also have researchers from the university. We have representatives from the University of Free State that are going to be talking on synthesis, characterization. And we also have an industry players that are already on this, and they're going to be telling about some of the best practices and the innovative methods that they're using. So it's just going to sink into what is being done to ensure that this thrives, because the industry cannot thrive without ensuring that we have innovations that cannot be disputed by anyone. So I'm really grateful that we also have our international audience as well as panel speakers represented from Colombia as well as Jamaica that are going to be enriching these conversations. So with me, I'm just going to introduce each one. We've got Dr. Ian Deploy from the ARC, who's going to be getting into the cultivation. And we also have Professor Motlalipula Matsabisa, as I mentioned, And we have Dr. Blessed Okole, who is one of the anchoring and the person who conceptualized this very track that we are on. And they'll be obviously going into what the CSR as well as the certain partnerships, but you will get to see what they will be putting on. And we also have on stage Mr. Gabriel Theron from the psilocybin, one of the initial players in this very industry that are going to be telling us about this, the innovative practices that they do in cannabis. And online, joining us virtually, we are honored to have Prof. Sandra Carrillo from the University of Panama, and from all the way from Colombia. And we also have Dr. Chara Watson, from the Scientific Research Council in Jamaica, who will be joining us last. But to get started and to ignite us in this, I would like to call Dr. Ian to give us his presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ian de Plooy from the ARC, and I'm going to give you a short introduction on the diversity in some cannabis land races and what is the implication of that on the cannabis industry, especially the local South African cannabis industry. As we know, cannabis is a very diverse crop with a lot of applications, but there's also a lot of variations. It's not a one plant fits all. So what we know very little about the diversity that exists in and between our local land races. We've got a variety of land races available in South Africa. There's a major influx currently of foreign genetic material into the country, hemp, as well as medicinal cannabis. And this initial study aimed to look at whether there are any diversity specifically between and within our local cannabis strains and land races. So what we did, we followed two approaches. The first one was to look at the morphological differences, and for that we used IPOF descriptor list just to see what morphological changes are there between the plants. And the second one was molecular characterization. Just before I go further, what we did, we collected material, and we got this material from various sources. The majority of the land races were obtained from the University of the Free State, from Prof. Matsabisa, and it was obtained as seed. So we planted this seed of the different land races, and afterwards we checked whether there are any variation between the seedlings originating from the same plant. So regarding the morphological descriptors, only 4 of the descriptors showed no difference, while on the remaining 12 descriptors used, there was various degrees of variation between and within land races. The majority of these were seen in the leaflet morphology, if you can see on the bottom slide there. Some of them with 3 leaflets, up to 5 or 7 leaflets obtained from the seedlings from different land races. So this is a clear indication that these plants were open pollinated. So the mother plant was the same plant, but it also most probably received pollination from different sources, of which the male parent is obviously unknown. It is also possible that the mother plant is not true to type, and it can even be self-pollinated, and then you can get some segregation in the progeny from that plant. If you look at the molecular characterization, we utilized 20 cannabis strains of some of them was foreign material. The majority of the local rand races are there at the bottom. And what you can see on this slide, that there are 4 distinct groups. The top group on the top there is the 2 hemp cultivars, SA Hemp 1 and 2, which is clearly in a separate group. The second group there, including the majority of the foreign material, as well as Durban poison that was obtained from an individual, so we're not sure whether it is true to type, and Malawi gold. Now, although this was not the purpose of this study, there's a clear distinction in that top group. The majority of them has high CBD THC ratio. Although I'm not sure of especially the imported material. The Malawi gold and the Durban poison, we didn't test it, so I don't know whether it is the real material, but it is part of that medicinal group. What is important is that the majority of the land races was different from those 2 groups. And they were covered there in two groups. The majority of them in the bottom group. What is important here to note is that numbers of MIMI 24, MIMI 9, MIMI 8, MIMI 20, the same with Port St. John's, was seed collected from the same mother plant. The seedlings were planted, and the results clearly show that these seedlings were different from each other. The bottom one, that number 10, Port St. John's Police 19, is from the same mother plant, and it's in a totally different group. So the importance of this is that seedlings collected from local land races are not necessarily uniform. It's not necessarily that you get exactly the same plants. And varying results can also be expected regarding the biological composition of these plants. The THC, CBD, CBG content might differ. We didn't test that. It's just a possibility. And the reason for that is that cannabis obviously is a wind-pollinated plant. Pollen can travel more than a kilometer. It can be pollinated from another source. Medicinal cannabis, recreational cannabis, marijuana, hemp are all the same species. They can cross-pollinate each other. If we look at hemp, the picture there, the left-hand plant is a typical hemp plant. For hemp, it is normally grown as a single stem because you need biomass. While if you go for medicinal plants or even CBD production, you need flowers. And for that, you need a more compact plant with side shoots. There's very limited information about the land races in South Africa. Where they originated from, there are some of these land races that are possibly called as different names, although it might be the same thing. And it's definitely necessary to do much more collections and descriptions. So my take-home message is short and simple. We urgently need to identify, characterize, and maintain our local land races at the national level. I'm sure that in South Africa we do have superior genetic material in some of our land races. And if this is not characterized and maintained, we're going to lose it, especially because of the influx of other cannabis material, especially hemp, that are imported to a scale now on hemp production. It can easily pollinate our land races with genetic pollution that will follow. So what we need is a national cannabis repository where we can conserve and diversify our land races, identify, characterize, and maintain the superior lines, which they are, and the documentation, including associated knowledge, our IK holders, intellectual property, local intellectual property. Second important point is to develop a certified seed system for commercial production, which will be legally sanctioned system for quality control, varietal identity, acceptable standards of seed for viability and purity. Certification of seeds involve a complete control system. And some of these is included in the Cannabis Master Plan. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deploy. Really quite encouraging, and also with the work that you're doing. Without no waste of time, I'm going to really request my panelists to stick to time. We've requested a maximum of 8 minutes, but I might just need to ask you to do a maximum of 5. I know that's stretching it. This is just to allow the audience to have a great interaction with you after this, and so they can interact. As I mentioned, we've got a session at 3:30, so I'm really going to request that you get to the key message of what your institution is doing in this industry of research and innovation. With no further ado, I'm going to request Professor Mutlalipula Matsabisa. I know how difficult it is, but I'm going to request 5 minutes of your talk on your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and good afternoon to all of you. Well, what I want to do, I think, in the next 5 minutes, if it is heavenly possible, is really to look at the challenges, and thanks to the ARC, because what I'm talking about is actually those, I think, plans that you were referring to. So I want to talk about the research and the development, and I think the message, that I want to relay is whether there is a need, for the expensive, setups, while in fact the research has shown otherwise. So I'm told green is there. So I really want to give you an update in terms of driving, I think, the point home in terms of some of the challenges and the recommendations, and then look at those concluding remarks. We did research on some of, I think, the 14 different strains that were collected globally. And what we picked up were that, I think, the plants that came from the Eastern Cape, the Pondo region, the Port St. John's, while we're looking at 3 different markers for breast cancer, they outperformed, I think, all of those, and we published that in the Journal of Science, as a turning point in terms of our research on cannabis. And then the question is, if indeed that locally, I think, grown plant growing up on the mountains has shown to be better performing than strains that came from Canada and everywhere else, is there a need or a requirement that we grow these in artificial lights? So what we have done is we did a number of, I think, extractions in the lab where we look at the terpenes, we look at the different cannabinoids. So what you see there, this is cannabis extracts and purifications and cleaning processes of the wild-grown cannabis, where you could see in your nice gold, flask, it is a THC-rich, sample. We could estimate that the THC content in that sample was about 50 to 60%. So it's very high THC, and that's why we call cannabis, and we looked at the smaller bottles. Those were the terpenes that we purified. But when we look at the different cannabinoids, because we have a system to look at the different cannabinoids. We could confirm that indeed, I think the Eastern Cape cannabinoids, in terms of the cannabinoid content, the THC, total THC of those cannabinoids was almost 95%. So indeed, very high THC. It does not surprise us that everybody keeps saying the cannabis from either, the Eastern Cape is the most potent. We identified a number of, I think, cannabinoids. We have about 30 different standards of cannabinoids. So this just shows that we were able to identify a number of cannabinoids and purify those and separate them. And I'll explain why. So what we did quickly, was then to look at a system where we decarboxylated, that means take out a carbon out of some of the acids in the cannabinoids, and see the presence of the cannabinoids. And these are a total number of different cannabinoids we could pick up, from the samples of the wild-grown cannabis, which justifies to us to say, again, is there a need for those expensive, facilities. Terpenes, I think we found different, types of terpenes, the low terpenes, the middle terpenes, and the beginning terpenes, and we could separate and purify them. And there's one particular terpene, the beta-chirophyllene, which I want to talk about. That is a terpene of interest to us, because what we want to do is actually, if you look at, the graph, that's the terpene to the far right in that graph. And it is sort of the highest terpene that you would find, but it is unique in the sense that even though it is a terpene, it behaves like a cannabinoid. It does act on your CB1 receptor, which is in your brain. But interestingly, again, I think, this becomes a regulatory issue, that terpene, in fact, it becomes a dietary supplement. FDA has, in fact, taken it as regarded, as safe. So should all cannabinoids be seen to be narcotics? Should all cannabinoids be, I think, taken as, medicines? And the answer is no, because we know that cannabinoids, you can find cannabinoids in your broccoli, you can find cannabinoids in your tea, you can find cannabinoids even in your carrot. So we need to be very careful by looking at cannabis and make it as a narcotic. Pharmacology, I will not go through this, but we did a number of, pharmacological, tests where we want to see the efficacy of these, plants. And in this, morning and this afternoon, a lot of people are talking about medicinal cannabis, but I did not hear them talking about the medicinal cannabis. So, but what was more interesting, we did a number of pharmacological studies, because that's our interest, to see can these cannabinoids have any medical applications and be developed to help us treat diseases. So we did a number of experiments. I'll not go through that. But what we want to do, I think, as a country, as the University of the Free State, is to innovate and be different. Everybody talks about CBD and everybody talks about THC. But all of the people that talk about CBD and THC, they never tell you whether it is pure CBD or whether it is pure THC. Because if you were to look at their products, you would actually find that it is a mixture. It is hardly pure isolated CBD or pure isolated THC. So there needs to be some quality control aspects that needs to be put up there. Beta-chirophyllene, it is important because, as I said, it works as a cannabinoid, but it is a terpene. So it does have about 21 different medical applications. And this is where I think we want to be unique, and we want to be not a me too, where we can now formulate the different cannabinoids, into drug-specific products. And what is of interest, if you look at that, the different cannabinoids would be specific for a different disease. But more importantly, before you develop THC, all those diseases, you would have THC contributing into that. So THC is not such a bad cannabinoid as everybody wants to think it is. But also remember, beta-chirophyllene, CBD, we call that, I think, a competitive, blocker of your THC, side. So that means when you have CBD and THC together, it masks up the effect of THC. What are the challenges? First, we start off. The challenges is SAPRA, if you could stop calling cannabis a drug or a narcotic, because that's where the challenge is. As long as our regulator calls cannabis a narcotic, they will have this mentality of regulating it as a narcotic. But better maybe we look at it and say, cannabis is a drug in development. And that's what we need to start off. Because if you were to move away from there, you relax the regulations on cannabis. You can relax your issues of the permits, you can relax the licenses, you can also relax your off-take requirements, because we want to say cannabis is not a narcotic, but cannabis is in fact a drug in development. But also I think we want to say to the regulator, let's become holistic. Don't sit as a regulator and say, I want to regulate. But you look at holistically and say, where does the country want to go? The country wants to develop an industry, in cannabis. So how then do you facilitate or make it easy for such an industry to grow and, develop? That's what we need to do. There are so many other strategies that government has, the bioeconomy strategy and things like that. So a regulator cannot sit back in isolation and say, I'm not part of the national bioeconomic strategy. I'm not national of your ASGISA, strategies. No, it cannot be like that. You need to be part of the strategies that government is putting up for job creation. But then the other thing is about cannabis and communities. This was raised, I think, in the morning. If I have shown you that the cannabis that grows up on the mountain has medicinal value, how then do we bring in these communities together? Now, the recommendations are very simple. We stop calling cannabis, a narcotic, but look at it, I think, as a drug in development. Like any research, like any product, we should look at it. Again, I think, there are these UN regulations and the guidelines and the quotas. But I think what is important there is South Africa to convince the International Narcotics Board and say, we are capable to manage our own cannabis. They will not say no to that. We are capable to handle what's happening in our country on cannabis. They cannot say that, no to that. Open field cultivation, I think that's where I want to propose and say, let's see if we can do open field cultivations of cannabis, because we have the sun, we have got everything. We don't have these gray skies that require artificial lighting, and that makes it, expensive. Regulations, we talk about the DTI industrialization. Let's be holistic when we regulate things. We can't regulate one thing and then the other one regulates the other thing. But let's become holistic, sit together and say how best do we, support industrialization of cannabis. Community support, anybody that has a permit, one would say, go back, let them train us in terms of how they grow these on the mountains, and they become part of our research and development. We can, in fact, do the uptake from them so that we kill off, these, illegit, trade. And lastly, I think, it's really to say we need to see how we support the small industry, how we support, especially I think what, our ARC has just said, that we have these strains that come from everywhere, and we don't even know what we have in our country, but in fact we have got gold. So we need to have some mechanism to support those small, I think, entrepreneurs in the mountains there, and how we support our own local industries and open up our own markets, in the country, instead of looking at quotas from Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Mazavisa. Really enriching and also challenges that you just posed. I'm going to just quickly request Dr. Blessed Okole to bring your presentation in. I know how difficult it is to ask really passionate scientists that are passionate in this, to ask them to cut off their time, but I really hope that you can honor that, Doctor. Thanks. Your presentation is ready.
As the one on small, yes, that one. Thank you. I'm Blessed Okole from the CSIR. She's given me 5 minutes, so I'll try to rush on the presentation, but at least make my point. Okay. So this is just an outline of my presentation. I'm going to talk about the South African cannabis industry, the challenges facing SMMEs. SMMEs is small, micro, medium, and macro enterprises, and how to solve some of these challenges, and the contributions that some government departments are doing in this direction. If we look at the South African cannabis market, we see that it's a very big market. We've been hearing that since in the morning, around 206 million. I don't know who are those making all that money, but this is from Prohibition Partners in 2019, and the growth is projected to be around 2.4 billion in 2027. That's a lot of money. Where are we going to make most of it? It's going to be in the flowers. The flowers will, from the product type, and from the compound type, the CBD and THC will be very high. For application also, they are looking at paint. Professor Masabisa just presented a table there on the different areas that they are looking on, what remedy they can do on that, areas that they can focus, and paint dominates most of those areas. And there are more than 900,000 small-scale farmers who are growing cannabis in South Africa. And when the regulation is fixed, we hope that we can have those 130,000 jobs, like what the president said, because that's one of the bottlenecks. And South Africa itself, if you listen to the presentations that we had this morning, has a big local market that if we have good products, we can capitalize on this market. What is preventing the growth? What's making this growth to expand? Because of people now acknowledge medical cannabis, the benefits of it. We also look at the high demand of cannabis in treating various diseases, like what Prof presented, and the growing number of government is also trying. I mean, now we have some regulations. They're really relaxing some of the regulations on cannabis, and also hemp also now has been transferred to the Department of Agriculture. And also a lot of research and development is going in this area, and we also have investment interest also in the area. But people like my friend on the right, Greg Zweni, he says government needs to do more to support small-scale farmers and SMMEs to enable them compete in the international market. Everybody wants to sell on that market stand where you make all the dollars and euros. So what are the main challenges? We've been working in this area also since around 2018, and mainly the main area is permits and licenses. The requirements are high. I don't want to go a lot. Everybody knows about that. And then research and development. If you look at those products on the right, because we at the CSI, we are privileged. People come, they say we can solve everything, although we can solve, but some of them are also beyond us. But if you look at the products on the right, for example, the creams that they have here, the green one is like a balm. During winter, it gets so hard. But these are simple things that we could use science and technology to solve. The capsules were leaking. The lip balm that you see on the second one also had bubbles inside. It means they didn't do enough stability tests. So those are some of the problems that they're having. And then also another problem is the branding of the products. They can't brand to, one thing that you see, which I think in Europe and America they've really perfected. You go to a shop, you even buy, you don't even know what is inside. You're just attracted to that product just because of the branding. And also financing. What is the government doing? What are we doing at CSIR and with other partners? The CSIR, together with the Department of Science and Technology, Gauteng Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and Department of Small Businesses, we had a recent call that we put out for SMMEs to see how we can support them on their products, and we had almost 100 SMMEs that applied. It was really overwhelming, and we realized that if you use normal system of using the papers, it doesn't work. So now if you have to put it, and then everybody sees it and applies. But we shortlisted this list on the 30th of July, and we presented the shortlist to a committee of experts, which we call a board. On the 12th of August, we interviewed them, and now we're trying to contract with these companies. We're going to shortlist around 12 or 15 just to work with them and see how we can take their products to the next level. And we're also going to work with other organizations like the Innovation Hub to help them, give them some business skills also. Let me just take a quick run on what we've been doing. We started with the Soxlet, as you can see, but we also got FECO, as you can see on the right, but this was a learning curve for us. You start very small on 1 liter scale. We moved to a 100-liter scale, so we can do, this is alcohol extraction. We can do alcohol extraction on a 100-liter scale. The equipment on the right, the 2 boxes, this one can take, the one on the right, the one behind can take temperatures to -20, the one in front can take to 120, so it's a multi-purpose. That equipment is built here in South Africa. It's for alcohol extraction. We went further to get the pure gold, like what Professor Matabisa said, and also did try to check the profile of the cannabinoids in it. It was also a learning curve for us, but we're working very close with Professor Matabisa. We got that right also. And we moved from the alcohol. Now we have, I call it a Rolls Royce. It's around 2 months now with us, a supercritical CO2 extraction machine that we are working together with Swane University of Technology. This is how I call it, I don't want to use the wrong word, but this is how the cannabinoids look when you get it from the machine after your extraction. It looks like that's inside the machine, and then when you get it out, it looks like that. When you put it in the container, it looks like that. It still has some waxes, but the good thing here is that you don't have the chlorophyll. You don't have chlorophyll when you do like in alcohol extraction. So we still need to dewax a little bit, and also by putting it in the cold temperature, and also we need to decarboxylate it to transform the acidic to the normal compounds that we want. And that particular equipment, you can use it for many other plants, for expensive plants like sandalwood, rose oil, turmeric, ginger, coconut. We've done trials on them, and they work perfectly well. And what actually we want to be seeing products like this also in South Africa, which are well branded, and I think if we do that to those SMMEs, they are going to benefit a lot. These are some of our unique facilities in the CSR, and Madam Chair, thank you.
Really, thank you, Dr. Okale. I really appreciate that lay of background of the research that's been done at both institutions, the ARC, University of Free State, as well as the CSIR. I think those are really great work that has been done in development, as well as the machinery that has been put in place. And I really think that all these challenges that have been brought up will obviously suffice into what the industry can do. I'm going to call the last speaker on the stage, and he will be bringing a different angle, and this is going to be in the biotech industry. Gabriel, just come in and speak to what you did to be one of the initial first players in this very industry in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so let's try and get this going. I feel a little bit out of my depth because I think it's all professors and doctors here on the stage, so I'll do my best today. A little bit of background on psilocybin. We are, I think, still the only, but the first cannabis company in South Africa. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? The first cannabis company in South Africa to both have a cultivation and a GMP manufacturing license. I won't go into too much details. Let me do this. So when I started in cannabis, I went to America, and I couldn't understand what was the difference between hemp and cannabis. And it's been covered today, so I'll briefly go over this. But it's effectively the same plant. It's just how much THC is in the plant. And it becomes very difficult for hemp farmers because of our sun. THC is created when there's a lot of heat applied to the plant. And then basically what happens is your THC level goes up. In hemp farming, it's a big problem, and it's been in the States as well, where they plant a whole field of hemp only to come at the end and realize that they're over the limit and they have to destroy the whole crop. So I think South Africa can learn from these lessons, and before our farmers go and invest all of these funds and end up losing it, I think we can, from a regulatory point, preempt these things. So we've heard how big this market is, and this is a slide that when I saw it was quite surprising. And if you look at 2022 there, the The global cannabis market today is about $400 billion. That is not an estimated, well, it is an estimated, but it is not, we project it's going to go there. It's already there. What it means is $17.7 billion is in the medical space, which is the legal side of things. $22 billion is on adult use, in predominantly America. The other 90% is illegal trade. And we'll get to that in a little. This was a very interesting slide to me. The largest consumer making up that 400 billion is China. So understand that this is completely illegal in China. So the takeaway point, and I'll cover it right at the end, by making something illegal or highly regulated does not mean you're taking it out of the hands of the people using it. What you're actually doing is you can't regulate it properly, you can't regulate the products, and you can't tax it. So the easiest thing is to open it up so that you can regulate it like we're regulating tobacco, like we're regulating alcohol. We're treating cannabis as this foreign child that we need to try and fit it into a box, and it's not that. It's just another plant. And the problem that we're facing is cannabis is the first, but what about all the other plant-based medicines that's coming? That's currently, some of them are also still illegal. And I think cannabis is just the one that will open the door for all of this. Out of that, if we're talking about Africa, Africa only contributes about 8% of the global market spent currently. So, and this, therein lies the opportunity for Africa to become a real player. In order for us to do this, and this is where we need to understand how far we are behind. In 2001, Canada legalized medical cannabis, and Luxembourg decriminalized it. This is 2001. 2013, Uruguay completely legalized cannabis. Italy and Romania becoming one of the first, or the 10th EU country to legalize medicinal cannabis in 2013. 2017, Lesotho started issuing medical grow licenses. 2018, Canada completely legalized cannabis. Thailand legalized medical cannabis. South Africa decriminalized. So Luxembourg did that in 2001. We'll go through these. But this is not an exclusive, inclusive list of every country, but I tried to pick the ones out of Africa so that you can see how far Africa is behind in this global, we call it the cannabis race, but it's much further than that. South Africa is so far behind. We're trying to play catch up. And the thing is, if we don't move, we're going to lose this massive opportunity. And we're trying to reinvent the wheel. The wheel's already there. Not everybody's got it right, but we can go and learn from them. Every country that's in cannabis has their challenges. That's without a doubt. If you look at America, they're still state-locked. They can't bank. They have their own issues. Canada's got their own issues. But we can go and learn from all of these guys and say, you know what, if we want to move as a player, we need to open the local market, because that's where you start with your R&D and your research, because you test it locally, you take it from there, do your product development, and you move into your global markets. So this is the 4 things, maybe touching on the R&D and innovation side, where I believe we can excel and do some research. And the one is extraction. So extraction, you look at these various ways of extracting cannabis. When I started in America, I asked them, so which is the best way of extracting? And they said to me, what do you want to end up at? Because depending on where you want to end with your product, that will determine the method of extraction. So whether that will be ethanol, CO2, butane, or even solventless. There's a lot of new technologies coming out. The next one is formulations, and this is something we take from Big Pharma, where they want to go single molecule, because single molecule you can do your clinical trials on. And I think we're moving into a whole different world now where it's full plant-based medicines, because if you think about it, all the plants, all the medicines that's out there, it's already created for us. It's a matter of us understanding what plants we need to take with what. I believe the pharmaceutical model of a single molecule, I think that's going to be challenged in the very near future. So also, and then how does the cannabis interact with other drugs? If you're already on other drugs, how does that interact? Is it a pro, is it a con? There was a case I know in the States where a lady moved from a CBD product to a better a nano CBD, and she had an adverse effect because of her other medication she was on. It's not cannabis per se, but it increases the bioavailability or the uptake of your other medicines. So it's something that we need to do research on. Then drug delivery methods. So this is whether it's oils, capsules, sublingual, suppositories, inhalation, or transdermal. The list goes on. So this is also a big research field where we can tap into and do some research. One interesting thing, I had a meeting with guys out of the States, and they do dry capsuling. So it's a dry inhalation capsule that you inhale. Just quite an interesting delivery method. And then delivery system. So there's a very different meaning to a delivery system, and this is how to increase your bioavailability of your product so that you can effectively use less product, but the patient, if I can call it that, has a better effect and a better uptake of that product. And one thing that we've done quite successfully in a partnership or a collaboration partnership with Val University of Technology is we created a CBD range whereby we've increased the bioavailability, still within regulation, but we increased the bioavailability. And the doc was talking about beta-carotene earlier. We've upped our beta-carotene very, very high because it acts as it looks like a cannabinoid, but it is a terpene. And we've had very, very successful reviews on our products. As a takeaway, I'm done before the police is on me. So the biggest problems that we have in the R&D space is we're limited because this is such a highly regulated environment currently, and the crossover from a R&D space into the commercial world, I think that's where we're finding a lot of challenges. Like I mentioned earlier, just by making something illegal does not stop the trade. We're just making it very difficult to regulate. We're actually endangering the patients that's using it because they don't know what they're getting, the quality of what they're getting and how that was grown. Now we've got 80 licenses in the cannabis space that's issued at a very high level or standard. So why not use those guys to supply the local market? At least the local market will know what they're getting, and it's a regulated product. Like I said earlier, Africa is about 20 years behind the rest of the curve, and if we want to become a leader instead of a follower, I think we need to broaden the scope beyond cannabis. I think we need to start looking at plant-based medicines completely. Canada's already on that bandwagon. They've already started opening up psychedelics, plant-based medicines. We are catching up, and I think if we want to turn it around, Africa's got all the medicines here available to us, so I think we must just tap into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. I think you've proved yourself wrong. You might as well put yourself in the professor and doctorate because you do have a lot of passion. Quite interested to see how that 5% of our global share can be increased to obviously the higher rate, and also the fact that you're working across the value chain is quite an interesting factor that we should get into, and what partnerships you're using to be playing in this kind of space. I mentioned that we do have our online audience that will be giving presentations, and as I'm rushing on time, I also forgot to introduce myself. I am Puti, Chilopo Mgobozi from the Innovation Hub. And I also just want to give you a hand start to just prepare your questions. Also keep your questions quite brief. As soon as all our speakers have given all their presentations, I will call you to just ask you questions to enrich the conversations that has been, that will obviously ignite the conversation with our panelists. I'm going to request assistant to check if Professor Sandra Carrillo is online to give a presentation. Okay, Prof, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Good evening to everybody.
We can't see you though, or your presentation. Okay, perfect, we can see you. Thanks, Prof. You can go ahead and give your presentation.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. This is a very important conference, and I think from all over the world, we need to move forward with research and education regarding to cannabinoid therapies. I'm going to share my presentation with you now. I am professor of Faculty of Medicine, University of Panama, and I've been dedicated to education. I am professor of different certifications in all Latin America, and I think we need to promote education based in scientific evidence. This is exactly what we need. When we talk about cannabinoid therapies, we're not talking about something new. We know that cannabis is being used for thousands of years. We have these records in 2,700 before Christ was using Chinese medicine. We have the Persian doctor Avicenna, who wrote in his medical book talking about the benefits of cannabis. But as the other colleagues mentioned, before the prohibition, we've been having restrictions to use cannabinoids and also to use to do research. But we have very important scientists such as Professor Raphael Mechoulam, who in 1964 discovered THC. Then we have in 1988, Alan Howlett and William Devane, who discovered the receptors CB1. And then until now, we have more than 51 countries who legalize medical cannabis. We see in here how by the 20th century, it was more than 100 papers published in the Western medical journals talking about properties of cannabinoid therapies. And we have here how they used to be sold over the counter. It's important to know, and I think they already talk a little bit about this. I'm not going to stop too much. Every human has an endocannabinoid system. This is one of the most important systems that we have because it's in charge of keeping the homeostasis in our body. Is compounded by some endocannabinoids that they are the ones our body produce, our own cannabinoids, and they interact with receptors that we have within our body. The most studied ones are the CB1 and CB2 receptors, and we have enzymes that synthesize and degrade these endocannabinoids, and it's because of this endocannabinoid system that we can have all these interactions with the phytocannabinoid. The phytocannabinoids is the cannabinoids that they are produced by the cannabis plants. We have in here how complex and beautiful is the endocannabinoid system. Is one of the more studied retrograde signaling system. As I mentioned, we have different cannabinoids. The endocannabinoids, the one our body produces, such as anandamide and 2-AG, but there's many others. Phytocannabinoids, the one that we've been talking in the conference, that they are the ones produced by the plant of cannabis, and the synthetic cannabinoids that they've been approved for different treatments many years ago. The plant of cannabis, I'm not going to stop in here, is a very complex and complete plant. The latest report says that it is being found that more than 1,400 compounds in the cannabis plant. So it's very interesting how to do research with the cannabis plant. But we know that we have the endocannabinoid system, so our body is designed to use the phytocannabinoids coming from the plant. Here we have in this slide some of the benefits of THC and CBD. I will not stop in here, but it's very important that these cannabinoids are the most studied ones, and they have a lot of important properties in the human body. As I said, it's a very complete but complex plant. And I show you in here how CBD, just cannabidiol, has so many interactions with different receptors, acts in ion channels, PPAR receptors, TRVP receptors, serotonin receptors. So I do education for doctors, healthcare practitioners, and I am in favor to advocate for legalization of medical cannabis, but I don't want it to trivialize the use of medical cannabis, because this should be prescribed by a doctor, because as you see in this graphic, it has many interactions. But if the doctor is the one who is prescribing, there's no way that the patient will have important side effects. As doctors and scientists, we are obligated to treat our patients based on scientific evidence. And this is why we need to produce more research. This was a very important publication in 2017 who talks about the health benefits and effects of cannabis and cannabinoids. And as for now, what we have in this publication is in the 2017, they said that we have conclusive or substantial evidence that the cannabinoid therapies as useful and safe for treatment of chronic pain in adults, as an antiemetic for the treatment of nausea and vomiting induced by chemotherapy, for the treatment of refractory epilepsy in pediatric populations, and for improving spasticity in patients with multiple sclerosis. As I said, as doctors, we have to treat on patients based on scientific evidence. And these are the ones who has randomized controlled trials and systematic reviews. But there is a massive amount of research that is being released in the last 10 years. So I see a bright future for research and medical cannabis and prescription for doctors. For finalizing my lecture, I want to talk about the Global Catalyst Initiative. This is an initiative dedicated to catalyzing high-impact win-win collaboration and initiatives to eliminate global health disparities. This is a very important initiative that it's led by Dr. Will Ngwa, who is a very important researcher from Harvard University. And with Dr. Berlin, we've been working in promote education and research and eliminating disparities. We are part of the International Phytomedicines Institute, that is an initiative who is looking for promote education and research. We are working with different technologies, with different universities to start doing multi-centric clinical trials with cannabinoid therapies. Dr. Ngwa is developing very important delivery methods and doing groundbreaking research. I had the opportunity to speak at the United Nations early this year to talk about how cannabis is reframing the future of medicine and driving a new frontier for a healthier society. I think we all need to be advocates in our countries and for the rest of the globe. I had the opportunity to work with different governments, too, with the government of Colombia, with the government of Panama. I've been lecturing all over the world, and I think education is the key for destigmatization of the use of cannabis as medicine. We have a lot of barriers right now for conducting research, but I think if we all get together to produce good quality of research, good quality of products, standardization, and involve more the regulators and the doctors in this trend of using cannabis as medicine, we are going to give better quality of life to our patients. Thank you so much for the invitation, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Prof. Carrillo, for that quite enriching intelligence on what you're doing in Colombia with your clinical trials. And I think that's the space that we are still looking into playing. And I believe that partnerships that we can also uncover with your institutions from this side can also help us get to the level where you are. Thank you. And with that regard, I'm going to request if Dr. Wetson is also with us. This session had quite a lot of speakers. So we do have Dr. Wetson from Jamaica, who also has a presentation to provide. Is she online? Okay, there you go. I'm gonna also ask you to do 5 minutes. Thanks, Doctor.
I got my timer set. I will try
Thank
to be 5 minutes.
All right,
So
thanks.
good
Dr.
morning. Well, for me, it's morning. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to reconnect with our friends and family and colleagues in South Africa. This is a conference, of course, that I look forward to. And I'm just, again, disappointed that I'm not able to be there live with you. So I'm going to be sharing the Jamaican experience as we have went on our way in establishing our formal cannabis industry. And I have to use the word formal here because we all know Jamaica and cannabis and the use of cannabis is synonymous. That's what most people associate Jamaicans with, cannabis use. But just to share, and I added 2 slides while I was listening to the other panelists. And just to share, the use of cannabis or herbal therapy, it's not new and it's not something that is now emerging. WHO indicated from studies done that approximately 80% of persons worldwide, whether you are first world, third world, developing or developed, rely on herbal medicine for primary care. Here in Jamaica, we did a KAP study in 2015, and that study revealed that 95% of persons first utilize herbal products for therapeutic use before they receive the traditional medicine or the Western medicine support. So herbal medicine is here, and the use of cannabis has been well known and will continue to be so. So I put this one on here for us. How did we discover that these plants, these herbs, have use? Let's go back from the beginning of time, the earliest days that we have associated to men, that using different things give us good outcomes. So Jamaica, we like to think of ourselves as little but Talawa. And what that means, we're a very tiny country with a population of just under 3 million people. But anywhere you go in the world, you know about us for several reasons. And one of them is cannabis. And I'm very proud of my small island because from as early as the 1970s, Jamaica had a standardized product, clinical products developed from cannabis to be used for treatment of glaucoma. And this product is the one that is on your left or right, depending on how you're sitting, Canasol. And in 2015, when the world was coming around again, and cannabis was the major topic for decriminalization or medicinal use, I was fortunate to be a part of a team that developed a suite of cannabis-based products, the company called Medicanja, and we developed and got approved by our Ministry of Health, a suite of cannabis products that have been utilized in the market. Now, in the 1970s, Canasol wasn't the only product we did, was not the only clinically developed product, but we also did Asthmasol, and as the name suggests, for treatment of asthma, and Canavert for the treatment of motion sickness. And these products all had very successful reign in both the local market as well as international market. Let us move in very quickly now, looking at since 2015, what has been the structure or the infrastructure that was established here in Jamaica for the legitimate use of cannabis for medicinal, therapeutic, and sacramental use. It's a plant, as I said, has a deep history here in Jamaica. The Rastafarian community, which you might know, has really held on to cannabis as a plant that is a gift from God, that is used for sacramental use. It's a plant that is to be respected and is respected. And therefore, when we were setting up our legal framework to capitalize on the emerging industry, we did so having sacramental and recreational use. So while cannabis is not legal in Jamaica, it has been decriminalized, and you find that each household in Jamaica can have up to 5 plants. There's no restriction on how productive your plant can be, but each household can have up to 5 plants for your personal, sacramental, or medicinal use. When it comes on now to developing standardized products that will be available whether for export or for use, and that are commercial, that is being used for a wider number of persons, there are specific things that were put in place. So you have support to the industry. You have support to the industry in terms of government institutions that participate in ensuring that the systems that have been identified are properly set up. We also have our academic institution which is why we're able to commercialize those first products that I mentioned, who have always been participating in cannabis research, because for our laws, while cannabis was illegal to grow and sell and possess, there was always allowance in our regulations to allow for research and development. The problem was, though, how do you get the plant to research and explore what it is good for? But nonetheless, we pushed on with that. And then, of course, we have private sector involvement that looks at the development of cannabis-based products and creating and improving products that are available on the market. So this is just a quick picture showing the connectivity of the respective ministries and agencies that are involved in enhancing and developing the cannabis industry. And just very quickly, I will just give some context in terms of the legal framework that exists here. Since 2015, we had a review of our Dangerous Drug Act, which now identified cannabis, which decriminalized cannabis or ganja for medicinal purposes. As I mentioned, it still remains a classified substance, and it's still listed as a Schedule I drug. And this is something that our ministry is very keen on having change, not just in Jamaica, but in the global sense. Currently, because it is listed as a classified hardcore drug, there are specifications in terms of the profile of the products that can be created. And a recommendation from the Ministry of Health is that a maximum of 5% THC content. Anything higher than that, then you will need to do very rigid clinical trials to confirm safety and not just therapeutic value. And I say that because those products that I was a part of developing and that got registered by the Ministry of Health here, we did not have to do clinical trials to have those approved. We were able to use literature information, developing and formulating products with specific concentration of the respective cannabinoids. And in our case, we're primarily focusing on THC and CBD in a known delivery system. So therefore, you could easily extrapolate what the potential benefits or side effects could have been. And we're able to use literature, clinical research data from that was done elsewhere, like from Israel or Canada, to say, yes, this formulation will work in this way and will have this impact and should be used according to this particular schedule. And we're able to get 7 products approved by our Ministry of Health. Our Minister of Health, Dr. Christopher Tufton, actually made an appeal at the World Health Assembly in Geneva in 2017 for cannabis to be removed from its current classification of a Schedule I drug. And he said, and I'm quoting, "Removing cannabis from its current classification is an important step in facilitating countries like Jamaica and South Africa to promote medicinal use while maintaining a sound public health approach." One of our panelists mentioned the importance of this, and therefore I went and put in that slide. So the SRC, and I'll just close it off here. I have notes on the other entities that is involved, but I will just focus on SRC to close off in the interest of time. Now, the SRC is an institution, a public institution that is set up to facilitate research and coordination of scientific research. And under the new or the revised Dangerous Drug Act, the SRC is responsible for reviewing and approving entities other than accredited tertiary institution or deemed to be akin to tertiary institution to facilitate the cultivation and furtherance of scientific research, including clinical trials, to be able to participate. Now, the business of science. I was very happy when my colleague panelists on the platform indicated what the dollars and cents of the cannabis industry is. So Jamaica having setting up the CLA, which facilitated licensees, and we currently have 15 licensees representing 7 companies. In 2019-2020 year, just roughly 3 years of the CLA being in existence, we earned almost 900 million US dollars, just under 1 billion. And our colleague indicated that the market in the Caribbean is 1.6 billion. So we are earning roughly 50% of the market in our region. And that is within 3 years of having the industry set up. So the opportunity is huge, but I want us to be mindful of the cultural context that we are operating in, and to be reminded that we have to be respectful of the consideration when we're thinking about the markets. We are not the other countries, and we don't need to be the other countries either. So I'll just leave it there and open for questions.
Really interesting, Dr. Watson, on that regard. We're still surprised that you only legalized in 2015. I think the general idea was that Jamaica was one of the leaders, but I think Luxembourg still beat us to this. I also wanted to just mention the fact that you allow 5% of THC, which is totally different from what we allow in South Africa, but I guess that's the whole understanding of how other countries play in this current industry. I just want to request that people can start lining up for questions, as all our speakers have. I will allow at least 1 or 2 questions. If there's anyone that has a very strong question to ask our audience, you may just go to the mic and just approach and ask anyone. But maybe before, maybe I go through Taboga. I was going to request someone different from the industry, but you may go since no one else raised their hand. Thanks.
Okay, I hope I'm audible. It was refreshing to hear that Jamaica is allowing 5% THC. What I would love to know would be that how did you scientifically came to that conclusion of that 5%? Because we are struggling this side of the world to unpack our limitations on our THC. And as I'd mentioned during my presentation, was that our land race strains that we are known for, that are pretty much grown in Mampon and various other places, the THC is 5%. Mm-hmm. And ideally, if we decide that we're saying a hemp should be then at 5%, it means that we'll automatically accommodate, those guys as well. And by actually making it much more easier. So how can you help us to actually convince our friends and regulators and the government as well, so that we can actually get to the point where we get to that level? Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Quite an ambitious request. I know that question should be to our SAPRA, but I don't know if Dr. Watson is able to quickly get to that answer on how they got to this in Jamaica. I would not want to direct that to our SAPRA representative for obvious questions. Dr. Watson?
Oh, certainly. Now, for us, I mentioned that your cultural and historical context is absolutely important when you're establishing your industry. It's important that we set up our industries that our context and our situation support. Now, Jamaica had a long history of cannabis use, and our land races had very high concentration of THC, 5, 10, 15, 20%, right? So looking at what we have been typically been using in recreation and other purposes, as well as looking at the scientific literature that support the therapeutic use of cannabis in terms of the respective cannabinoids and what concentration they have activities, we were able to come with a concentration that will definitely not just support safety, but also therapeutic value. So we looked at our cultural and historical context and what we have typically been using and what we recognize happening here, as well as using literature to support coming at that concentration that makes the most business and therapeutic sense based on what we had happening here in Jamaica. So that is important for you to do in South Africa.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Watson. I'm going to request that we actually get to the conclusion of the session, but before we do that, I will request parting thoughts from our panelists. I'm not sure if Prof. Carrillo is still online. I just wanted to actually ask her what is the percentage of THC as she does her final parting words on her side, and as conclusion with regards to what she discussed, and I'll come to our panel on this regard. Is Prof. Carrillo still there?
Yes.
Yeah, so tell us how was Colombia and THC allowance and just your parting words from this session, Prof.
Yeah. Yes, I have medical cannabis clinics in Colombia in different cities. We have more than 2,000 patients right now. What we use in Colombia is compound pharmaceuticals like magistral formulations for prescribing to our patients, but the government stipulated the difference, and they divided it in psychoactive and non-psychoactive, even though the terms are not like the right terms, but they talk about less than 0.2%, 0.3% as a non-psychoactive, that means hemp. So the percentage is 0.3%.
Thank you so much for that. And also, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to come to our panel here on stage. And in your parting words, I think I'll start with just requesting that you just get into the possible. I know you mentioned the fact that there's difficulty in ensuring that you have a certain amount of CBD and THC being given to be constant in a way. So I just want to know also, especially from our ARC or CSRR as well as the ARC, in your parting words shortly, I'll give you 2 minutes as you conclude with regards to the possible genetic modification research that has possibly been encountered into to ensure that there's an increased yield for CBD. And to you, Gabrielle, I also just want you to just get into the partnership that you got into to ensure that you are able to play in those value chains that you mentioned in your presentation. But I'll start off from Prof. Matsabisa as in your parting words in 2 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think the opportunities are there, but whatever drives policy should be guided by scientific facts. I'm not so sure which comes first, whether you develop policy and then science follows, but I think in this instance, science, research needs to guide policy, so that we are not left behind. But more importantly, I think it's more important that we develop the industry here at home based on what we have, based on the availability, I think, of the cannabis that we have. Without one, I think, contaminating it with foreign strains, so that at least we know that we can develop our own medical cannabis.
Dr. Deploy?
Yes, from our side, I just want to say that in South Africa, we do have a rich source of genetic material, superior genetic material as part of our land races, as well as a lot of variability that is available that can be utilized for research, can be utilized for breeding, and these need to be characterized as soon as possible in order to protect what we have in the country for the benefit of the country.
Thank you so much. And Gabriel?
Thank you. I think the first thing that we need to realize is that we shouldn't regulate the plant. We should regulate the end product. I think if you regulate the plant, you run into a lot of other problems. And cannabis is difficult because it can be an end product, the flower. So I think the biggest challenge that the regulators would have is how do we now get a flower which is never ever consistent, even if you take it from the same plant, even if you do labs on it, you're never going to have a consistent dosable product that you can deliver as a medical product to any patient. And I think therein lies the challenge. I think like any other pharmaceutical product, it needs to get further processed down so that you can dose. But I think first of all, you need to deschedule and then regulate the end product. So if the end product is a pharmaceutical, treat it as a pharmaceutical. If the end product is recreational, treat it like such and put the regulations in place. And if it's industry, treat it as such.
Thank you. I also just wanted to just touch on the partnerships that you've managed to get into and all those value chains, especially in your research area, just the institution that you're partnering with as a company.
So from a psilocybin point, we've decided to collaborate. I won't call it a partnership. They won't be happy with me. We're in a collaborative agreement with Vaal University of Technology, where they assist us and we basically help them and we're open to any other institution where a lot of times in science what you realize or what you find is there's amazing research done, but there's no ways to commercialize. And where we play the role is our partner can do the research, bring a product to us, and we will commercialize it and pay a royalty based on what's successful.
All right, thank you so much for that. And I do want to mention that you must look out for psilocybin on the JSA. They are almost getting listed, and well done on that. Our anchor to the session, your last parting word, Dr. Okole, please get into it.
No, I think we should look at the end product and the user, who is going to use the end product. It's very important. And we should also look at what markets are we going to focus into. Should we look at our South African market and put all these big regulations on our South African market, or should we be looking at the pharmaceutical market in Europe? It shouldn't be one code that fits all. Yeah,
thank you so much. And with that, I really just want you to please help me give our panel a round of applause for all this. Thank you so much, and apologies for the next session. I believe that we have a next session on the rising stars that needs to get started. So thank you so much, and let's make this industry work, and thank you.